Folks, so glad to see you all here, and it's nice to see a full lecture theatre here. And my name is Lech Shivanos. I'm the principal at the campus here, and I've been asked to be the moderator for tonight, so new experience for me. So you're part of the 100 debates tonight, which are happening tonight across the country in 100 locations, and local community groups are responsible for arranging them in local regions. So for our region, the Living Earth Council has coordinated tonight's event here, so thank you to them. Before I get too far into our agenda, I do want to take the opportunity to reflect on the theme of tonight's debate, being focused on the environment. And as we know, the environment has certainly gone through an increase of attention in the last several years especially. And but our native population has been, it has been a part of their culture for decades and centuries. And I want to take this opportunity to acknowledge that we are in a traditional and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people. And I'm hopeful that as we engage in today's dialogue, we can bring attention to ideas to solving our shared environmental problems through this work, and through that honor the land of the Mi'kmaq people that they have shared with us. In terms of a few housekeeping things, occupational health and safety, if we hear any alarms, lights flashing, the nearest exit is right out that door, and that takes you outside, or the way you came in. And on your way in, just before you walk down the little steps, there's washrooms as well. Please feel free to go there if you need to. And we have first responders on site tonight, so any needs for AEDs or any kind of first aid, we have lots of folks to help you out. Just wave down any of our security staff that are around. Okay, we have 5 candidates. All candidates who are invited are with us tonight. And we just had a draw for seating and order for responding. And closest to me in the first spot is Lenore Zan, representing the Liberal Party of Canada. Beside Lenore, we have Bill Archer, People's Party of Canada. In the 3rd position, we have Scott Armstrong from the Conservative Party. In the 4th position, Larry Duchesne from the New Democrat Party. And on my far end there, Jason Blanche from the Green Party. Welcome. Now, just so we have a roadmap for the next 2 hours. We have 2 hours for the debate, and it's tight, but I think if we timed it right, we'll get there on time. So we have 8 questions. The first 4 questions that will be asked are common to all of the 100 debates happening tonight. They were submitted from their organization. The last 4 questions were solicited from the community, and the Living Earth Council collected the questions, synthesized the themes, and generated those questions. So 8 questions in total. Each candidate will have a minute and a half to respond, and once we've gone through a question and everybody has a chance to respond, throughout the debate, each candidate has 2 opportunities for rebuttals. And they have little maple leaves there. They're very seasonal. Just like this. So they will raise a maple leaf, and that tells us they want to do a rebuttal. And once they've used their 2 wild cards, then they've used up their opportunities. And once we've got through the 8 questions, there will be an opportunity for each candidate to present some closing arguments as well. In terms of decorum, you are a lovely looking crowd. I'm sure we'll have a great time, and we've got some excellent candidates. And I think we're in for a treat tonight. But needs to be said, we do ask for reasonable decorum from guests and candidates. Tonight, the debate is being live streamed on Facebook, so it's going to be particularly important that we keep the room volume low so we can hear from every candidate, especially for folks who are tuning in by live stream. So really ask you for cooperation there. We're going to keep to the time limits tightly, and if we need to, we will mute them, although we have a great crew, so I'm sure we won't need that. In terms of the candidates, like I said, please stick to the time limits. The ask from the organizing group is that you focus on the question, stick to the theme. It's environment tonight, so we're asking you to stick to the questions. And finally, candidates, we would like to know what you as an individual MP would do to help solve these challenges rather than just simply focusing on what your party platform is. So local debate is really focused on the local thoughts and opinions. Other than that, are we okay to get started? Okay, so we will begin with opening remarks from each candidate. Michelle is going to be our timer. You have the timers that will be right there for you. And we'll begin with Lenore.
Well, hello there. Good evening. Thank you so much for being here, everybody. It's great to see so many people who are caring and passionate about the environment. We were all upset last night because we didn't get asked any environment questions at the last debate, so this is a good time to do this. You know, climate change represents an existential problem, a threat for all of us here in Canada, and especially here in Nova Scotia, where we're surrounded by water on all three sides. The Chignecto Isthmus is just a small little body of water, and all we need is the ocean rising up on either side of it, and we could very soon be an island. I've been the environment critic in the government of Nova Scotia for the last 6 years, and I've introduced a number of environmental bills, which I'm very proud of. Many of them banning plastics, banning tire burning, setting up a new environmental way of going forward from EGSPA, and also the one that I was the most proud of was a private member's bill called an Act to Address Environmental Racism. It was the first of its kind in North America, and it's now mentioned in numerous books. And I did that because I saw how our First Nations people and our Black communities in particular were suffering from racism of the pollution that is on their shores and in their communities. So we need to address that, and I'm here to do that tonight. Thank you.
Hi everybody. I'll do the best I can tonight. I just got off a plane early this morning, but I'd like to thank everybody for taking time to come out tonight and listen to what we all have to say on our different views and different ideas for how we can help with the environment and help to address the issues that are affecting us here today in Canada and Nova Scotia and around the world. I'm probably going to be the odd one out here tonight. I don't really talk a lot in public like this, so I'll do what I can and the best I can to answer the questions. I do believe that climate change is an issue, and we do need to address the things that we can and we can't control in our area, and hopefully I can purvey what I would do if I was selected to be your MP and see what we can do from there. I don't actually need the whole minute and a half. I'm just going to cut it short there, and hopefully I can answer the questions good enough for everybody here this evening. Thank you.
Well, I want to thank you all for being here. As the Conservative candidate, I have been a member of Parliament before. I actually served on the Environment Committee for a couple of years. In fact, I served on the Environment Committee with the current Prime Minister on the other side of the table. I want to thank LEC for hosting tonight, and the NSCC and the Living Earth Council for coordinating this event. Earlier this year, the Conservative Party released a comprehensive environmental plan that's designed to help us reach our Paris Agreement targets. Now, the fact is that Canada is going the wrong direction. In 2016, the Liberal government estimated their plan would fall 44 megatons short of the Paris targets. In 2017, Canada's UN submission said that we'd fall 66 megatons short of our Paris agreements. And in 2018, they projected that Canada would fall 103 megatons short of our Paris targets. As you can see, we're going in the wrong direction. So I'm glad to have the opportunity tonight to talk about our plan and give you the opportunity to compare it with the other plans of the other parties, and especially the plan of the government, which, as we can see, is not working the way it should already. Thank you for your time and your patience tonight, and I look forward to debating you all on the policy of the environment.
I agree with my fellow beside me here that we're not going in the right direction. We're not going fast enough anyway, but the Conservatives won't take us there faster in the plan they've got, especially when they disagree with the carbon pricing, which I think is an important part of any policy on climate change. Climate change is my favorite topic in this election. The NDP recognizes it as a crisis, and I caught the conversation of a few girls in my area not long ago, and they were talking about, should we have children? They were concerned about what kind of world their children would live in, or if they'd have a world even to live in. They were very negative about what kind of future they would have. So climate change is clearly the number one thing. We've got to make sure the world is going to be safe. Forestries and protection of our water systems is also very important to me, and I'll be talking a bit about that.
Hi everybody, I'm Jason Blanche, I'm the Green Party candidate. I really appreciate all of you coming, Living Earth Council, for putting this together. I can't tell you if I'm exactly happy or really sad about this, but this is my fourth time running for the Green Party, and most of the entire times that I've done this, people have told me, don't talk about the environment, don't talk about the environment. You have to talk about all the other policies, because people already think Green Party is environment. So maybe tonight I can talk a little bit about the environment, and I can also tell you a little bit about myself, because I've been a long ways coming to be a politician. And I was very first an environmental activist. And I can't believe I'm going to tell you, but I've done crazy things in my youth to try and protect the environment. I've sat 4 days in 1,200-year-old trees so they wouldn't be cut down. I've walked 500 kilometers around New Brunswick to protect boreal forests. I've grown organic food and sold it. I've done a lot, and I continue to do a lot. I've recently finished building a passive solar home, off-grid, solar-powered house. We grow organic vegetables. We buy our food at, from local farmers markets. It's been my life, and I realized along the way that I couldn't, as an environmental educator, I couldn't convince people to change, and ultimately I've become a politician. Because I thought if I could change the rules of the game, then it would make it a lot easier for all of you to live environmentally. So I look forward to the debate tonight. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So we'll launch into our first question, and Roseanne will be the first one to respond. And here we go. So the first question is on climate change. Around the world, we're seeing inspiring examples of leadership to reduce greenhouse gas pollution and accelerate the shift to a green economy. At the same time, we're seeing a ramp up of the effects of climate change, and the scientific consensus is that we have little more than a decade to turn things around. We see extreme weather events across the country, including wildfires, flooding, and droughts. These are causing anxiety and worry, given their enormous financial and environmental impact. Per person, Canadians produce the most greenhouse gas pollution of all G20 industrialized nations, nearly 3 times the G20 average and over 20 tons per person. The question is, what are the key elements of an action plan that you will advocate for to ensure Canada meets its international obligations to reduce greenhouse gas pollution?
Thank you for the question. I have to say to begin with that as somebody who's been aware of climate change and the environment, the importance of the environment, and the importance of listening to our Indigenous elders about these issues, I have been fighting for the protection of the environment, for water and air and soil for many years, starting off in California back when it was considered a hippy-dippy thing to do. But I would come back to Nova Scotia and try and teach people what I'd learned there, including that echinacea is really good to help with colds, which my mother didn't believe me then, and now she asks me if I take my echinacea, which is it shows you how far people have come. People are starting to get it. Unfortunately, it takes a while. So I'm pleased to be running for the Liberal Party, where we have a leader who actually accepts the fact that man-made climate change needs to be dealt with expediently. And one of the things I disagreed with him about was buying the pipeline, the Trans Mountain Pipeline. I was not pleased about that. However, I'm glad to see that $500 million a year will be made from that, which will go directly into trying to transition into clean, green economy and energy. And we need to keep producing jobs, green jobs, the creative economy, jobs of the creative economy, and training other people out of those energy fields into something that is green and sustainable. Thank you.
Well, first of all, contrary to what a lot of people might have heard or said, myself and the People's Party, we do believe that climate change is real. I mean, we may split hairs on what the cause is, anything else, but really we have to focus on the things that we can deal with. And that's where my party and myself, I believe that we have to work on better regulations to protect the land, the air, the water. I mean, 14,000 people in North America die from air pollution every year, so we have to work at reducing the amount of pollution in the air. We need to make sure things like the aguatows and the dike systems within the isthmus of the Shenandoah Basin have to be reinforced and rebuilt, because in the last 60 years, little if anything has been done to it, regardless of climate change. They're in need of repair and work, and there's a number of different things we need to do. I mean, we need to ensure that, I still find it amazing to me that First Nations here within North America or within Canada, some reservations don't have clean drinking water. How can we live in Canada and people not have clean water to drink? That's the type of stuff that I would rather focus on, is the stuff that we can control and we can work on, rather than focusing on, how are we going to control the climate? We can't. But we can focus on dealing with what we can control. So that's where I'd like to maintain and focus on. Thank you.
Well, I thank you for the question. The Conservative Party believes in the polluter should pay principle. And that means if you're producing a massive amount of greenhouse gas emissions, you should have to pay the tab. Now, the current policy we have in the Government of Canada, the Trudeau Liberals, is not an environmental policy, it's a tax policy. It's surrounded by a carbon tax. I don't support the carbon tax because I believe it's anti-rural. If you're living in a city and you're working in a downtown law firm or a university or a port, you can take a bus or you can take public transit to work. We can't make those choices here in the rural areas of the country. And 92% of the carbon tax across the country is being paid by individuals and small business. Meanwhile, the big emitters in this country are exempt. Our plan will tax big emitters. We will make the polluter pay. Anyone producing over 40 megatons is going to have to contribute to a science and technology fund, which we're going to use to create new technology, which will help those companies reduce their own carbon footprint, share it with other companies in Canada, they can reduce their carbon footprint. But best yet, we're going to produce the best and the most exciting technology in the world, which we can export to China, who produces 27% plus of overall greenhouse gas emissions, India, the United States. We need to help the rest of the world because Canada produces 1.5% of overall greenhouse gas emissions. We can't solve this problem by ourselves. We can show leadership, we can show innovation. That's what we should focus on. We need to focus on reducing our own carbon footprint, but we have the research and technology, places like this, community colleges, universities across the country. We can support them with finances from these big emitters and use it to produce clean, green technology. That is one plank of our plan. There are 3 planks. I'm going to discuss them all tonight. One is green technology. I'll get back to you.
Like I said earlier, that we recognize climate change is a crisis, and our plan will bring Canada to carbon neutrality by 2030. And starting with the dropping of the subsidies, on the gas and fuel industry, and working with business and working with labor, we want to create a national plan that will transition us from a fuel-based economy to a green economy. hundreds of thousands of jobs can be created in the process, good paying jobs, and we'll make sure they're good paying because we are the Labour Party, and we're the party with a relationship with Labour, and we want to make sure the jobs are good paying. A lot of Labour people in our party. A lot of those jobs can benefit rural areas. We have the Bay of Fundy, we have the geothermal energy in Spring Hill. So a lot of those jobs are coming to the regions, and well, we live in the regions, and that's good for us. We'll set up a Canada Climate Bank with $3 billion available for investing in alternate forms of energy, solar, wind, and all the others. And in addition to that, we want to make $15 billion available for the programs and projects that are going to achieve the transformation that we're looking for. Projects like, thanks.
Time.
So it's a very important question indeed, climate change. And the first climate change conference I attended was in 1999. I've been actively engaged in trying to do education on this topic for 20 years. I can't believe it's 20 years. We have an overall vision, and the first point is to overcome politics as usual and work across party lines. This is not a partisan issue, it's an emergency. We want to work toward emissions targets in line with the recommendations of climate scientists and benchmarks from the Paris Agreement, and fundamentally adjusting our priorities to achieve a dramatic change while helping people, displaced workers, through a transition, what we call a just transition. So to do this, Green government will pass into law a Climate Change Act requiring a 60% reduction of greenhouse gas emissions below 2005 levels by 2030, reaching net zero by 2050. And will set declining legal emissions limits for industry. So it's right out of the IPC recommendations, just a little bit stronger. We're going to do carbon pricing, also known as a carbon tax. We're going to maintain a broad-based revenue-neutral carbon fee on all sources of carbon dioxide pollution, with dividends to be returned to Canadians, which actually really helps the people living in poverty. So they spend a lot less than they get back. I have 6 seconds. Nonpartisan governance, and finally renewable energy. And I'm out of time. I'll tell you more when I can. Thanks.
Thank you for being awesome with the time. Are we ready to move on to question 2? Okay, wonderful. Question 2 is on water. Many Canadians know that our country has the longest coastline in the world. Less well known is that Canada is home to roughly half of the world's lakes and roughly 10% of the world's wetlands. Canada is seeing the impact that industrial development and climate change is having on our water resources. We are seeing the reemergence of pollution hotspots like Lake Erie, and the Insurance Bureau of Canada notes that since the 70s, there has been a massive 250% increase in natural disasters, including floods and droughts, that are likely related to climate change. The question is, what can the federal government do to work with different sectors, like municipalities and farmers, to reduce both water pollution and the risk of flood events, which have been aggravated by industrial development and climate change? First response, Mr. Bill.
Well, the first thing we can do is we can work together to make sure that we're not building subdivisions in floodplains to begin with. I mean, that's part of the first thing, is some of the developments where we've been putting them is just absolutely, well, for lack of a better word, idiotic, just because it's got a really nice view. Other things we need to do is, when it comes to talking about like Lake Erie and stuff like that, we have to work with the farmers on what they're using and how they're using nutrients in the soil, and also what kind of pesticides and the amounts that they're using, ensuring they do proper things like proper drainage and runoff, so all these nutrients aren't running into, example, Lake Erie here, where you're going to get the algae blooms due to the large amount of nutrients that are hitting the water. I still say, I said it in the first question, I'll say it again, I still find it amazing to me that we can manage as federal government to send billions of dollars overseas to ensure somebody in Africa has clean drinking water, but yet we can't find $12 million for Attawapiskat, for example, to give them the proper water treatment plant that they need so they can ensure that they have clean drinking water. I mean, the water's important. Water, air, land, it's all important, and we only have a limited amount of it, no matter how much we think we have, and we just gotta get it right. And I see I'm starting to flash here, so I'll pretty much cut it off there and let him go from there. Thank you.
In 2017 in Canada alone, municipalities dumped 215 billion liters of raw sewage into our lakes and rivers. Think about that. Think about the damage that they're doing. That's just because we have an antiquated system of infrastructure. So one of the most important things we can do is work with our municipalities and our provinces to get the infrastructure dollars in place so we can have proper wastewater treatment systems across this country. The second thing I want to talk about in our limited time is wetlands. We need to help protect Canada from floods and droughts. Wetlands do that, so we need to support the conservation of our wetlands. We need to support the growth of our wetlands. We can't have development, as Bill said, on areas that are on floodplains, but we also have to watch and protect our wetlands as well, because they're a big driver of a good economic, I guess not a good economic, but a good environmental policy in this country. You know, we have close to 1/4 of the world's remaining wetlands. We have a huge international responsibility to protect that border, because when you look across the world and you look at Canada, we are the home of clean, green water. We're also the home of wetlands. So we need to invest and conserve in those wetlands.
One of the projects I picked, is as a consequence of global warming, rising water, and storm surges and more storms, the Isthmus of Chignecto. The coast is eroding. The CN tracks and the Trans-Canada Highway are threatened, and federal government can work with provincial governments and municipalities. And what are we going to do about it? And one of our ideas is to move the highway and the tracks to a higher ridge, which exists, be fairly expensive, but it's got to be done. And the other is to raise the dikes a little higher to protect the farmland. The other incident or the other topic I want to talk about very quickly is coastal oil and gas exploration. And storm frequency and the intensity associated with climate change increases the risk to offshore exploration and drilling. And the Nova Scotia Petroleum Board is going to be made responsible by the federal government for environmental assessments. The problem with that is that it's mostly oil and gas people on the board. So the board has to be more fairly represented. But still, that's a short-term solution. Let's make the board more fairly represented, but also we have to stop exploring offshore and drilling and harvesting gas and oil offshore because it's too risky.
And it's time.
So I think I'm good to go. Water is sacred. Okay, safe drinking water shouldn't be something we have to decide who can have it or who can't have it. It really is a human right, and we need to recognize water as a human right. What we find with a lot of these issues like water, is we often get lost between if it's a provincial or a federal or a municipal, or is it an Indigenous government issue. There's so many levels of government in Canada, and what we have to do is what the Green Party will do is have a Council of Canadian Governments. And they will bring together provincial, territorial, local, municipal, and Indigenous governments to discuss issues like this. And many issues, and climate change is of course the same thing. This is a part of it. We'll develop a national water strategy to ensure safe drinking water. Okay? We'll protect a minimum of 30% of fresh water, lakes and rivers by 2030. We have to protect wilderness and water in our country if we have any hope of surviving climate change. We need to climate-proof water infrastructure. Drinking water and sewage systems have to be able to not become polluted or overflow in times of flooding. We have to establish a national buffer zones around waterways. We have to do tree planting and soil rebuilding. And finally, we have to support farmers. They have to have support in protecting wildlife habitat areas and water quality and soil quality on their lands. So there's a lot to do, but it's all doable. Thanks.
Hi there. Oh, hello. Hello. Hi there. Okay, so our plan is to protect 25% of Canada's land, 25% of the oceans by 2025, and work towards 30% by 2020. We're going to establish a new Canada Water Agency that will work with provinces, Indigenous communities and municipalities and scientists to find the best ways to keep our water safe, clean, and well managed. We're also going to introduce Canada's first ever Aquaculture Act and work to develop a responsible transition plan from open net salmon farming to closed containment systems by 2025. We're also going to be spending $2 billion to repair and upgrade public water systems for our First Nations people. There were 137 communities on the list of communities that did not have drinking water, and of those, we have now fixed the problem for 87 of them in the first 4 years, and we intend to fix the rest of them in the next 4 years. I think that's a really good statistic. We also want to launch an employment disaster assistance benefit in consultation with experts, workers, and employers by 2021 to help replace lost income while they protect homes or relocate in cases of disaster. As I have done here in Truro, I managed to get $8.5 million to help us when we flooded. So I'll continue that kind of work. Thank you.
Go to the next question, folks. Wonderful. The next question, question 3, is focused on wilderness conservation. When asked about what they love most about our country, Canadians often point to natural beauty, wildlife, and spectacular wilderness areas. Yet we're falling below our international commitments to protect these spaces, and our parks and other protected areas are not funded at the level needed to conserve the diverse plants and animals that live there. A recent study shows that 50% of Canadian wildlife species are in decline. 87% of Canadians value the emotional and physical benefits of spending time in nature. However, 82% say that they're concerned that future generations won't have close or easy. Question is, what will you do to protect the quality and quantity of wilderness in Canada? Scott, first answer.
Well, thank you very much for the question. You know, Conservatives represent the bulk of rural ridings across the country, and we have great support from community groups who are actually out in the woods. Hunters, anglers, and other associations like that, they are the true best conservationists, are the ones that actually are out in the woods, that understand nature. That's where they live their lives. We have many, many groups across the country. Unfortunately, the current government has canceled meaningful consultations with our hunters and anglers. They've removed important programs like the Lake Simcoe Cleanup Fund and allowed harmful environmental practices to carry on here at home, such as dumping 8 billion liters of raw sewage in the St. Lawrence River. We've got to change direction on some of these things. Our real plan for environmental change will review and update strategies for invasive species and major pests. We will manage the protected areas and lead consultations to make sure our approach has the best interest in coordination with communities. And we'll reinstate and improve important conservation funding and better manage undervalued habitats that have been neglected, like our wetlands I talked about in the last question. So we need to reconnect with our rural communities, reconnect with our conservationists, our hunters and anglers, and work with them. Now, while we were in power, we massively expanded our national parks and protected areas across the country, including Haida-Gwaii off the coast of BC. I was very proud to be part of the environment committee that did that. We need more parks and more protected areas. Thank you.
All living things need habitat. And if we clear cut our forests, we're destroying the habitat of a lot of animals and insects. First thing we need to do is to limit or eliminate as much as we can the clear cutting that's going on. Clear cutting leads to a degradation of the soil also. A lot of it erodes. And the next generation of forests, if there is going to be one in our lifetime, it's not going to be as good as the one that we destroyed. We need to protect our national parks from development and increase the land under federal park protection. While also increase protected land for wilderness not in federal parks. And the United Nations is recommending between 12 and 15% of our land to be protected. We're saying let's go well beyond that. And we need to look after our water much better. Local communities should have a say on the final say on their watersheds. And if somebody wants to set up a mine, they should be able to say, no, you can't do it. We need tougher regulations on the use of chemicals on farms. Not saying you can't use any, but you get more tougher regulations at least. And I'll stop because the time is 1 second 0.
When we talk about wilderness conservation, we really start to feel the overlap of the different environmental problems we're facing. We want to protect forest, and we have it in our policy that we're going to protect 30% of the land, the water, and the ocean. But when it comes to forest, it doesn't really get protected anymore if we just say you can't cut in this forest, because the forests are burning down. And that's a climate change thing. So I think it will always come back over and again. Do we have to address climate change? We have to address it so immediately. When we protect the land, we have to be willing to put in fire breaks. We have to make those decisions. That we have to interrupt the land even though we don't want to. We're also, other things we are going to do is develop a national forest strategy. We're going to have evidence-based in partnership with Indigenous peoples, provinces, and territories. We're going to increase funding to Parks Canada to protect ecological integrity. And we'll fully restore the Canadian Environmental Assessment Act to its pre-Harper era strength. So those are a lot of important points. We're going to put $100 million a year for 4 years for Indigenous-led protected and conserved areas. We're going to fund stewardship of these lands and waters by Indigenous guardians. So we have a lot of stuff in this platform. I'd love you to go and take a look at it. I'll never get half of it out tonight. Thanks.
I know a minute and a half is hardly enough. What we're planning on doing is a re-elected Liberal government will actually set legally binding 5-year milestones based on the advice of experts to reach net zero emissions by 2050. We plan to ban single-use plastics and microbeads. And we also plan to make strides to protect, as I said, our wilderness areas by 25% by the year 2025, 30% by the year 2030. But here's the other thing about watersheds. We're dealing with a situation right now in the Tatamagouche area, the Warwick Mountain area, where there's a proposed gold mine. I've been fighting against putting an open pit gold mine in that area since we first heard about it. And I want to shout out to the Sons, the Sustainable Northern Nova Scotia, for fighting against this as well. These are the types of things we do not need here in Cumberland-Colchester, the same as any of these toxic waste sites and also dumps. We need to protect our watershed. We need to protect our water. As my colleague from the Green Party said, water is sacred. And I believe that water will become the #1 valuable resource, natural resource in the world very, very soon. The other thing that we plan to do is to plant 2 billion trees within the next 10 years And we plan to hire 4,000 people every summer to go out and plant those trees. So get out there and help us. Thank you.
Well, as somebody that used to go hunting, I've talked to some of the conservation officers, stuff like that, and we have to look at everything when it comes to talking about conservation. Like currently, the estimates when they go and look at, say, deer populations, which is where I used to hunt, is they go and check the herds and stuff like that and do their assessments every 5 years. Well, a lot can happen in a 5-year span, so we have to look at how often and how long we're doing that. We also have to look at things like how we're managing our forests and if we're maintaining diversity. I don't think on Crown land that we should allow any type of spraying that messes with the biodiversity of the forest itself. And I mean, some of the things when it comes to the forest conservation plans and stuff now is basically all tilted towards how we're going to use them for profit and economic gain rather than how we're looking at the health of the land and the health of the forest. And we really have to get everybody to sit at the table and have the conversation that we need to have. I mean, part of the problem, the biggest problem I see today, we're talking about environment tonight, but we've lost the ability to have these conversations without getting all fractured and arguments with each other. And until we can all sit down like adults and have that rational conversation and have the trade-offs and come to the common solutions that we work with together, we'll just be beating our heads against the wall and yelling. So that's pretty much all I got on that. Thank you.
That concludes the third round. Excellent. Okay, question 4, long preamble here. And question 4 is got to do with pollution and toxic substances. Canada has made big strides to improve our health and environment by regulating toxic substances. Legal limits on lead in gasoline, restricting chemicals like DDT and ozone-depleting substances, the Canada-US Acid Rain Agreement, and the phase-out of coal-fired electricity have had an enormous impact on our well-being by saving lives, preventing illnesses, and saving billions of dollars in avoided healthcare costs. However, air pollution is still a leading cause of death and illness in Canada. In addition, our laws and regulations have not kept pace with emerging threats from newer toxic substances in our environment, including from pesticides in our food and other harmful chemicals in everyday consumer products. Many of these substances have demonstrated links to cancer, genetic damage, developmental problems, chronic illness, and many other health effects. These effects are often more severe for children and other vulnerable populations. Our overarching toxics law, the Canadian Environmental Protection Act, has not been significantly strengthened in 20 years. Now we're at the question. What will you do to ensure that Canadians are better protected from the health and environmental impacts of toxic substances? Will you commit to strengthening the Canadian Environmental Protection Act and the Pest Control Products Act? First response goes to Larry Duchesne.
Yes and yes. On a more on-the-ground level, there's still a lot of chemicals used in power line right-of-ways and sometimes on roadside right-of-ways and rail right-of-ways, chemicals that kill everything. You know, they don't just kill the vegetation, they kill all the bugs around it too. Go hunting for a snake in an area that's been sprayed, you're not going to find any. So we need to control that, control it or eliminate it if we possibly can. We can do what the HRN did, ban the use of herbicides on lawns. For strictly, we don't need, it's strictly cosmetic. We don't need big, beautiful lawns. We need a little bit of space where bugs can grow. Because bugs are food for birds and a lot of other things. We can widen the no spray zones around lakes and rivers. We can encourage organic farming and encourage farmers to make as little use of chemicals as they possibly can. And I know the blueberry growers now use fewer chemicals than they did 10 years ago. Instead of just doing general sprayings, they check to make sure spraying is needed. So that's progress. So they can be encouraged to help us.
So it's a really good, important question, and yes is the answer to both. Canadian Environmental Protection Act was quite weakened during the Stephen Harper years, and it's been yet to be corrected. But even if that is corrected, we still have a problem that we don't have the right in Canada to a healthy environment. 193 countries are recognized by the United Nations, and 180 of them have some sort of legislation recognizing that the citizens have a right to a healthy environment. That takes care of your water, that takes care of air. If you have a factory in your town, you really have no legal right to say my air shouldn't be polluted by it. If you have something that's putting poison into your water, you have no legal right. So one of the biggest things we'll do is legislate a right to a healthy environment. It's so important. It undermines everything else. On top of that, we'll improve monitoring on pesticides, and we'll reduce the use of pesticides in agriculture and support farmers in the transition. We'll ban the use of neonicotinoids, ban on forestry and cosmetic uses. Ban non-forestry uses of glyphosate-based herbicides. That's all the time I have, really. So the most important thing is we need that one piece of legislation that protects our rights. And it should be in our Constitution.
Well, I have to say I agree with my colleagues here. One of the very first things that I did when I became an MLA here in Truro was I took my concerns about cosmetic pesticide use right to our NDP government. And we had a majority government, the first ever in the history of the province. And we passed that bill. So in fact, it already is passed here in Nova Scotia. And we do have a ban on cosmetic pesticide use. I also have been fighting against glyphosate spraying for a number of years now. I've been very vocal about it. I've taken meetings with the Minister of Environment. I took 2 First Nations chiefs. I took three mayors with me to the meeting, and she had stacks of paper on her table saying all these people had asked to have glyphosate spraying. And I said, but please, it's carcinogenic. Why would we have this on our forests? Why, it's leading to all of these blooms. It turned one lake that I visited green and toxic. These things need to be addressed now. One of the bills that I introduced in the Nova Scotia legislature was a bill to enact the rights for an environmental bill of rights, and I'm very proud of that bill. Also, clean jobs, green jobs, the bill that would help us transition into turning away from fossil fuel related jobs. We need to do these things as quickly as possible, and I will continue that fight in the government, and I will definitely agree to try and change the EPA and anything else that's getting in the way of a healthy environment. Thank you.
Well, the fact that this hasn't been looked at in 20 years pretty much states something that is kind of ridiculous to me in the first place. I mean, this is something that should constantly be being reviewed and being looked at. But in saying that, say a phrase from Thomas Sowell comes to mind where he actually said, there is no solutions to problems, there's only trade-offs. And that's what we're dealing with here now. They had a problem with dealing with certain types of weeds or whatever, so they end up spraying glyphosate everywhere. And then we find out, well, now it causes cancer and all kinds of other things. There's a number of issues like this where we keep rushing into a solution only to create new problems. And we really have to stop and step back when we're looking at these and actually do, okay, what are the unintended consequences? If we're gonna do A, what can happen with B, C, and D? And that's where this Environmental Protection Act would have to be reworked, because we actually have to stop rushing into the latest thing to find out 5-10 years down the road, oh, wait a second, we made a huge mistake. I mean, I remember growing up in the 70s when we were talking about the Great Lakes with the problem with acid rain and all the pollution in the Great Lakes, and they did some great things back then and cleaned up the lakes. Now here we are again talking about algae blooms and other problems that are starting to come into waterways that we'd already dealt with before. I mean, we just keep on running around in circles, and we really have to stop and get this stuff right. And 20 years for an Environmental Protection Act is just ridiculous. Anyways, thank you.
Well, Brian Mulroney was named Canada's greenest Prime Minister in 2006, and he was the one that brought in this act. He also negotiated the acid rain treaty with the United States and opened up 8 national parks. When I knew this question was coming, I was actually thinking about it, and it reminded me of something. And some of you will know this person. I had a friend, a really good friend, went all the way through school with him. And he was a teacher, and he traveled the world. His name was Tom Stevens. And the last bit of his career, he taught in China, he taught in Beijing. And as you know, we know that they produce a lot of greenhouse gas emissions, but they also have terrible smog problems in the big cities in China. And Tom suffered a cardiac problem there because of the smog. I really believe that. And he passed away, and we lost him. We can't allow this to happen in Canada. I won't allow it to happen in Canada. 80% of our population now lives in our big urban cities. And although we don't have huge smog problems yet, we've got to make sure we take steps so those don't happen. We have to do that. So a Conservative government is going to review our air quality standards, and we're going to put in new regulations and make sure we take care of our urban air sheds so that we can protect our urban population from air pollution. Thank you.
And that brings us to the halfway point. Oh, a rebuttal. Yes.
I just wouldn't want to see the whole meeting go by without using a rebuttal. And I very much agree with Scott with regard to cities and air quality. And I just wanted to point out that using a form of carbon pricing would be a good incentive for people to start buying electric vehicles. And really, one of the biggest problems that we're facing in our inner cities is the fact that there's so many single purposed vehicles, one person trying to commute to and from. And we really have an opportunity when we drive up the cost of fuels to get people to buy electric vehicles. And the nice return on that is if you have a neutral carbon tax, then the people that can't afford a vehicle at all, they all get a pretty nice check, which will make their lives easier. Depending what they choose to do with that money, it may be to feed their families. But there's a lot of benefit to it, and I know it's something that Scott's worried about, and I share his concern. Thank you.
And quite respectfully, I believe what Jason's saying is true. The exception is if we have this plan that he's putting forward, it might work in the cities, but it disproportionately hurts us in the rural areas. And we can't allow that to happen either. Like, we don't have a choice for urban transit. And our economy here is based on agriculture, fishing, forestry, transport. And when you artificially increase the price of fuel, that's going to do severe damage to the competitiveness we have here in the rural areas for our economy. And we don't have to have just one or the other. We need the environment and the economy to work together. And that's why all of us up here have the same goals. But we want to make sure we do it so we have balance in our systems. So increasing the price of fuel to try to force electric vehicles, that's going to help air quality in cities, sure. But it's going to do damage to us in rural areas. There's other ways to go about it. We're going to put a green energy tax credit into homes. We had a home renovation tax credit through the Economic Action Plan during the recession. We're going to have the same type of program for homes who want to make changes to re-insulate, heat pumps, solar panels. We want to inspire people through tax incentives that equally affect us all the way across the country so that we can lower greenhouse gas emissions. Buildings and homes create about 12% of overall greenhouse gas emissions in Canada. If we can do something to inspire people and support them to lower their own carbon footprint in their own homes, we can actually make a significant difference in greenhouse gas emissions in Canada. Thank you.
I'd like to support a liberal policy, but the carbon tax, the way it's set up, it puts money into the hands of lower and middle income people in the form of rebates. So even though the cost of fuel might go up a little bit, the average person is going to be better off.
Not to get into our next question, but it kind of is. It is to do with agriculture, which I believe our farming is our next question. But we've actually already invested $27 million in the Agricultural Greenhouse Gases Program that will help Canadian farmers develop and use clean and sustainable agricultural technologies and practices. And we also invested $100 million in agricultural science and research, hired 75 new agricultural biological scientists to address emerging priorities like climate change and water conservation to help mitigate the biological threats to agriculture. I've been the agriculture critic as well as one of my 11 critic jobs for the last 6 years, and I've been working very closely with farmers, talking to them about the changing seasons and the change of the climate crisis. And I've seen firsthand the damage that it's done to orchards. They get fire blight now, which they didn't used to get when we have hurricanes, and a number of the uses that they have for their land is now under threat. So part of what our government will do is try to protect those lands for the agriculture, so we can still continue to grow healthy food for Canadians. And I think that's it. Thank you.
Any more? Let your leaf fall.
I let my leaf fall? Oh,
Yes.
let it fall?
Yeah.
Okay.
Helps me see how many leaves are left
There we
and how
go.
many rebuttals are left. We're working a little bit of humor and seasonal symbolism. Guys, you're doing great. Thank you so much for sticking to time and keeping us on track, and thanks for being a great audience. We're halfway there. We'll move on to question 5. So as Lenore mentioned, question 5 is focused on farming. Eliminating fossil fuel use and switching to green energy is essential to tackle global climate change and avoiding catastrophic temperature increases. But as recent 2019 IPCC reports have indicated, shifting energy use only gets us half of the way to agreed upon targets, and changes in intensity of land use is equally important. Here's the question. What programs and supports would you propose to greatly improve sustainable land use in the agriculture sector in Canada, to help farmers sustain and increase soil carbon storage, and to reduce greenhouse gas emissions from their farm operations? First response goes to Jason.
Thank you for the question. Farming has so many challenges going on today. Nearly half of Canadian farmers are 55 years old or older. We have to encourage young people entering the farming profession, and we have to promote smaller family farms, urban farming, rooftop gardens. That's the direction we have to go. We have to grow food close to the people who are eating it. A large part of the emissions from farming is the transportation of the food. So some of the policies we have are support for farmers shifting from conventional to organic and regenerative farming systems. Invest $2.5 million per year into a land and quota trust program and farming apprenticeship programs to expand local small-scale agriculture and help new farmers get started. Protect the right of farmers to save their own seed and promote heritage and seed banks and seed exchange programs. Set a target to replace a third of Canada's food imports with domestic production. Doing that would put $15 billion into the Canadian economy, and it would save gigatons of carbon dioxide emissions. Finally, we need to assist in reestablishing the infrastructure for local food productions in canneries, slaughterhouses, and other value-added processing. So we have to invest in local farmers, and we have to take care of the food locally once it's grown. Thank you very much.
Canadian-made foods are recognized around the world as being top-notch, really good quality, highest standards. And they're responsible for 1 in 8 jobs across the country. So our food sector is really a powerhouse of our economy here, particularly in our rural communities like Cumberland-Colchester. So we have a vision that we've introduced actually called the Canada Food Policy, the Food Policy for Canada. And what it entails is investing in our agri-sector so that we can promote Buy Canadian campaign. We want to promote better nutrition and improve lives for all families, including people on the lower income spectrum. So we intend to invest $134.4 million in new funding over 5 years to make this vision a reality. And the vision is that all people in Canada are able to access a sufficient amount of safe, nutritious, culturally diverse food. We want to tackle food fraud, which means the mislabeling and misrepresentation of food products. We want to start a national school food program for all children. A local food infrastructure fund, $50 million to that, to strengthen food systems to be resilient, integrated, and sustainable, and facilitate access to the safe and nutritious food, especially for at-risk populations. Thank you.
Well, first of all, I'm not a farmer, so to talk about farming, I mean, I would have to talk and listen to the farmers about what they're doing and find what we can do to help make things better. But there are things I do know about our unique challenges here in Nova Scotia. For example, Cumberland-Colchester County, we're only using 15% of the arable land that we could be used for farming. So that means there's 85% of the land that we could be using for farming to grow food locally is just sitting there growing wild right now. So that would be an initiative where I would have to work with local and municipal leaders to help see what we need to do to actually help grow and invest that. I also know, 90 to 95% of our food in this province is imported, which that affects everybody provincially as well, because that's 95% of the money that you're spending to buy this food that's leaving this province, which affects the economy, which affects everybody as well. I mean, I also know in the 1900s, there was a census where Nova Scotia actually had over 600,000 head of cattle at the time. Today, we're approximately 60,000. These are all issues that we have to deal with in a local and provincial level to help address the issues that we're talking about here. So, I mean, a lot of the programs I'd work with would have to be in conjunction with the provincial, municipal, and the farmers themselves to find out what's best, what we can do to help make ourselves self-sustainable, which will help reduce emissions and make things better for all of us. Thank you.
In order to support our farmers in carbon storage and carbon capture, we first have to have farmers to do it. And that's why we have to support the next generation of farmers getting into the system. I told the story last night, but I'll tell it again because many people weren't there. I was going door to door out in Upper Stewiacke last week, and I met one of my former students from South Colchester Academy. He was 14 years old, and his dad was helping him in the barn learn how to drive a bobcat to plow out the cow slop, and he was covered in it, and he kept banging in the walls, and his poor dad. Now, he wants to take over the farm. He's 14 years old, but tax changes made by the Trudeau government have almost doubled the cost of the tax on capital interest that they're going to have to do to transfer that farm from one generation to the other. We've got to change that and repeal those tax changes and support the next generation of young farmers so we can pass on the farm to the next generation. Now, very quickly, carbon capture and storage, we need to fund that. The federal government has to support our farming and agriculture industry. It's a huge opportunity, and it's a growing opportunity, and technology continues to grow. So how do we do that? We're going to tax big emitters. We're not going to tax the little guy. We're going to tax big emitters, anyone producing over 40 megatons, and that money is going to go into a fund for research and development, because that is the answer when we're dealing with this stuff. Research and development funds, we have the best, most innovative minds in the world here. We're going to support our farmers and have the best carbon capture technology in the world. We can do this because we have the best innovators.
I I just had access to the last four questions as we started this evening, so some of my answers may be a little short and sometimes creative. We all know that corporate farming depletes soils, and so we need to encourage the family farm as opposed to the corporate farm. And we need to produce less meat. We need to use our land to produce. It takes much less energy to produce grain than it does to produce meat, and we need to encourage the production of grain, not to encourage the production of meat. And we need to encourage, somehow find a way to stop cows from farting, if that's possible. Because we all know that emissions from cows cause greenhouse gases. Well, actually, if we reduce the use of meat and increase the use of grain, we won't have as many cows here. So we will reduce that problem by doing that.
Any rebuttals to that? Good you. All right, folks. Question 6. This one's focused on fishery. Being that the marine environment and coastal fisheries are Atlantic Canada's greatest natural and industrial assets, and being that a species-based approach to fisheries management has failed to protect and restore depleted fish stocks and has impoverished marine